Hello everyone, welcome back. Now that we have the basic architecture for actually performing initialization work inside of our application before the main UI for our application is shown kind of laid out, I think it's prime time for us to get into the actual code and kind of code us the actual logic that's required to be set up before our actual application is usable. So what do we actually want to do in the initialization of the app when we're showing the splash screen? Well, what I'd like to do is that I'd like to take the data that's inside of our main.json file and make it globally available inside of our application for whatever classes, services, or other things like that that require access to it. And then also to set up some other useful services that need to be accessed globally, such as a HTTP service and some other services that we'll get later on in this course. So let's get into it and let's see how we can go about that process. So the first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to my splash_page.dart file. And inside of here, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a new function inside of our splash page state class. And I'm going to call this function setup. This function is going to be responsible for actually loading up the data from the file that we have, which is main.json, setting up services and everything like that. So to get going, what I'll do is that I am going to, inside of this class, create a function which is going to be of type future. So this function is going to return a future, and this future is going to have a return type of void, and then it's going to call _setup. And then inside of here, we'll have a build context, and this is going to be called _context. This is going to be an async function. And why async? Because accessing the actual system file storage and then pulling out data from there is done in not constant time. And since there is a delay in that, this is going to be an async function where we're going to wait for the actual things to be done. So the first thing that I need access to is going to be the getIt instance, so the getIt package instance. And the getIt package is going to be the package that is going to allow us to register Singleton for different classes that we have inside of our application and then make them available to us. So what is a Singleton, you might ask? Well, a Singleton is just one instance of a class that is globally accessible and the same everywhere. So we're going to get started by defining a final variable, and we'll call it getIt. And then we're going to set it to getIt and then .instance, and then it might give you an error, and that is because you haven't imported getIt. So I'm going to go top to where we have packages. I'm going to import, and I'm going to do get_it.dart, and it should autocomplete the import for me. And now the actual error should go away. So once we have access to the getIt, the next thing that we need to do is that we need to import, or we need to load up the data from the actual config file. For that, what we have to do is that I'm going to define a variable called config file. I'm going to set that equals to await, and then root bundle, which is a system utility that Flutter allows us to access files from the actual system. And then from root bundle, I'm going to load the string. And what is this string going to be? Well, I'm loading the file, so I have to provide the path to the file, which is going to be assets/config/main.json. Once that is done, we should have access to the file. So now that I have access to the file, I need to get the JSON data out of it. So for that, what I'll do is that I'll define a new variable called config data, and I'll use a function known as JSON decode. And for this, what I need to do is that I need to import the actual Dart convert package. So I'm going to go to the top, and you'll see that Flutter automatically imported this for me, but I'll just organize it and keep it at the top, just because I like to kind of keep my imports all nicely organized. And then inside for the source, I'll just pass in the config file. So what this will do is that it'll take the data that's inside of the config file, and it'll try to decode the JSON inside of it, and it'll give it to us. And then it'll give us a dictionary where we'll have key value pairs, and then we can access the data. So now that we have this, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to get some structure to our actual config data. Yeah, I can just use this actual variable that's given to me, and I can just go in here and I can do config data, like config data, and then just do base_API URL, base API URL, and that should be well enough for my purposes, but I just want to follow some better practices. So I'm going to actually create a new class which is going to model the data that's present inside of our JSON file, and we're going to actually use that class to actually obtain the data that we require. So for this class, since it's a model class, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this model. And inside of the model folder, I'll create a new file and I'll call this config.dart. Inside of the config.dart folder, what I'm going to do is that I am going to actually create the class. So I'll call this class and then app config. And then I am going to, inside of here, define the 3 actual attributes that we need access to and that are present inside of our main.json file, which is base API URL. We have final string, and then we have base underscore image underscore API underscore URL. And then finally, we have final string, and then we have API underscore key. And then I'm going to define the actual constructor for our class. And this constructor is going to take in all of these 3 attributes. So dot base API URL, this dot base image API URL, and then this dot API key. And then Alt-Shift-F, Command Save, go back to my splash page, go to the top, import my actual model. So I'm going to do import /models/ and I'm going to rename the actual file from actual config to app underscore config, just to be have the same naming scheme as the class that it presents, and then do app underscore config.dart. And I do not know what the issue is, so let me do the import again, /models or models/ and then app underscore config.dart. And I already saw what the issue is. The issue is that the folder name needs to be models and not model. And then we are good. So once I have access to the app config model, I'm going to go down, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a new instance of our app config. And then I'm going to use getIt to actually register this as a singleton. So I'll do getIt, and then I'm going to do .register singleton. And inside of register singleton, what I'm going to do is that I am going to instantiate the app config class. But before I can do that, what I'd like to do is that I'm going to define what type of singleton I'm registering, and I'll call this of type app config. And then I'm going to, inside of this function, instantiate the actual app config. So I'm going to do app config, open brackets, and then inside of here, I'm going to provide the actual arguments that are required. So the first one is going to be our base API URL. The second one is going to be our base image API URL, and the third is going to be our API key. And then now I'm just going to take our config data, and I'm just going to kind of paste in. So base API URL, config data. We can do here, we can do base image API URL. And then for the API key, it's the same way. So config data, and then we access the API key. And with this, I'm going to add a comma. I'll do Alt-Shift-F, Command Save. So once we have the actual setup function defined for now, and we'll add more functionality to this in the upcoming videos, I'm going to call this function, and then once this function's initialization is complete, or this function's working is done, we'll call the actual onInitialization complete function inside of our widget. And this is really simple to do. All I need to do is that inside of my future.delayed, I'm going to copy my function call, and I'm going to comment this out because we don't need this anymore. We don't need a delayed future. And then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to call our underscore setup function. And inside of our setup function, I'm going to pass in the context, and then then. And once the setup function is done, I'm going to just disregard the value that's get passed in to us, and then I'm going to do widget.onInitialization complete, do Alt-Shift-F, Command Save, add this trailing comma just to make everything look nicer, reload the application, and make sure that everything works. And as I can see, everything is working since we're getting no errors. So once this is working, you're going to see that the splash screen is not being shown at all. And it's not because the setup function is not working. It has more to do with the fact that the actual time that it takes to actually load the file in and kind of do all of those things that are in the setup process is so fast that we don't see the actual setup screen or the actual splash screen, and it goes fairly fast. So to kind of like counteract this for now, what I'm going to do is that I'll still keep the future.delayed function. And inside of our future.delayed function, I'm going to actually call my setup function after a second. And once that is done, inside of that, I'll call my initialization complete function. And this will be a massive UI/UX improvement. And now you're going to see that we first do the 1 second delay, then we do the setup, and then we finally call our on initialization complete, in which takes us to our actual my app, and then that takes us to our main page. So with this, I'm going to reload the app for one last time, make sure everything works. So with this, we have successfully added the ability inside of our application to go fetch the data from the main.json file and made it globally available in our application through the getIt package that we're using as a singleton. And in the next videos, we'll keep further developing the functionality for our setup function and keep enhancing the logic of our application and adding services that we're going to require later on in the development process of our application. So with that, I'm going to end this video here. I hope that it's been useful for you. If you have liked the course till now, please don't forget to leave a review on the course and help fellow students that might be asking questions in the course Q&A. Also, we have a Discord community that I'm going to kind of pop up a banner down below in this video, so you can kind of join it if you want to have your questions answered by other professionals and students that are taking the course like you. And with that, I'm going to end this video here, and I'm going to see you guys in the next one. Thank you.